Good evening, ghouls and fiends, and welcome once again to another edition of the Ministry of Horror, this time live on twitch.tv/Tezzius. I'm your host, Tezz, and we're back once again. We're doing another live show, and these live shows are coming quite regular. Not just necessarily the shows, but we've been doing a fair bit of streaming. So, since the last show, well, just prior to the last show, but since the last Ministry of Horror stream, we've done some updates. So you're probably sick to death of me banging on about it, but unfortunately, it's something I'm just going to have to plug on on every show because that's just the nature of the business. We now have a Patreon. We are on patreon.com/Ministry of Horror, of course, where you can join as a free member if you so wish. But we do also have membership tiers where there's going to be some cool things going on there. So one of the things that you get being a paid member is you get the Ministry of Horror show 48 hours before regular platform feeds. Now, obviously, if you're watching this on Twitch, if it's a live show, you get it live. But if you prefer to listen on the podcast platforms, if you're listening to this, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Music, or Audible, I think, as well, I'm not too sure about that one, then you'll be hearing this about 48 hours after Patreon subscribers. So it's not a big deal. It's only a small window, but it's it's to give some incentives on that platform. And then other things we've got, there's like a $5 tier, buy me a cup of coffee. I like coffee. But the purpose with the Patreon platform and the Twitch donate features is getting married this year, and so doing what I can to help build up that wedding budget pot, honeymoon pot, just to help pay them bills. So that's something I have to plug. Patreon.com/Ministry of Horror. Give a shout out to the members on there. We've got James Please. We've got Gareth White. And we've also got Paul Barrow. Thank you to our patrons. We're going to have some new shows going on there. A new monthly show is going to be, I haven't figured out a jazzy title for it yet, but my fiancée Victoria, I'm going to make her watch horror films that she's never seen before or isn't familiar with to give her insight, to give her review. First one we're going to be doing is Mulholland Drive by David Lynch. Not a super horror notorious film, but it's David Lynch's arguably one of his best films. I was tempted to get her to watch Lost Highway because I've recently given that a rewatch. I got the 4K Criterion Collection edition, and Lost Highway is brilliant, and it does also feature a little cameo of Marilyn Manson and Twiggy Ramirez, which I'd forgotten all about. And she did used to like Marilyn Manson back in the day. But in terms of wondering what on earth is going on, I mean, you're going to have questions about pretty much every Lynch film, I think. 90 Slave Fiance, that's pretty good actually, Fran. 90 Slave Fiance. We've got Fran the Cannon in the chat. Thank you very much for that, Fran. Yeah, and we're going to be pushing that. I'm going to be really working hard on Twitch. We've got a little donate feature on PayPal for if you want to donate whatever, a cup of coffee, that sort of thing. But I know it's probably annoying to hear these shameless plugs and all of that stuff. But at the end of the day, we're hustling. It's a side hustle to well, the show isn't a side hustle. The show's my baby. But, we're doing these side hustles just to really try and do what we can for our wedding and honeymoon. So, got to give a shout out to the new followers on the Twitch channel. We are getting so close to that 100 followers. That's really, really cool to see. And also the new subscribers. We've got quite a few new subscribers on the channel. Thank you very much. So, in terms of what is happening on tonight's stream, we're going to do our usual Ministry of Horror show. We're going to do some news. We've got some reviews, which will be Last Voyage of the Demeter, which I had seen a few weeks ago, but I'm only now getting around to reviewing it. And also Grafted which is a Shudder exclusive Australian horror film. We're going to talk about that a little bit later on. In terms of general updates, because I've been doing a lot of streams recently, there's not actually a huge amount to update on. We've been playing Dead Space on the Twitch channel, so if you have missed those streams, they should be in the archives. I think the archives stay live for a month, maybe. So if you do fancy watching me just scream, you can check those out. We've also done a chill stream, because I love horror, but horror games, man, I'm a wuss. So I need to lower my heart rate. So we jumped into some Life is Strange double exposure recently, because I really just need to work through the games that I have and start completing some things. So that's been fun. Outside of that, Warhammer, we've got a little bit more progress on on the one figure that I've been painting for what seems like months. I don't know if on camera that will go into focus the closer I hold it. I think this camera has autofocus. Not sure. Just dither around that. Apologies that you're basically getting dead air while I mess around with miniatures on camera, but we've got a few more colours onto that, which is nice. And outside of that, I've been working through making some progress on The House of Last Resort, my current horror book that I'm reading. To say that I am trying to speed through it to an extent, because I really just want to get on with Song of Susanna for the Dark Tower, which is something I never thought that I'd be, I never thought in years gone by that I would be kind of keen to really kind of continue on my journey to the Dark Tower. But here we are, we're on the trip to the Dark Tower, and it's going nicely. But The House of Last Resort, it's okay so far. I mean, it's written well. Not entirely sure where it's going to go, but I guess that's a good thing. And that's kind of where we are. I mean, outside of that, it's just been house chores, streaming, and wedding stuff. They've kind of been the main things really in the world of Tezz. And then what we're kind of reviewing, that's really all the horror that I've been able to watch since the last show. It doesn't actually feel like it was that long ago that we did the last show, but I suppose don't know actually, when did the last show drop? About a week ago. Yeah, it was about 5 days ago. So we're rapidly catching up with ourselves. Yeah, that's kind of it, really. That's kind of where we are at. So without further ado, ghouls and fiends, let's just keep this moving, because we are going to be doing a watch party tonight, which is why I should mention we're probably going to do a fairly condensed show. We're going to do the news. We've got the 2 reviews. There's no featured presentation, but we are going to do a watch party or a watch along, and that should, which, oh God, knowing my luck, it won't be on Amazon anymore. But what I'm hoping to watch along, whatever you want to call it, is Dog Soldiers. Is that still there? Prime Video. There we go. So if you are watching live, we'll be doing that a bit later on, and I'll just throw out timestamps as we go, so we can kind of try and watch it as in sync as possible. Now, I've just seen that the film is from 2002. I knew it was an older film, but man, now that we're in 2025, doesn't half make you feel incredibly old. Yeah, on that note, it's time for the horror news. This is the news. Ho, 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 ho.
This is God.
There we go, horror news time. So, as per usual, all of our horror news comes from bloodydisgusting.com, a great source of news and reviews and editorials and all that good stuff. And we don't have any new film lists to work through yet. I guess maybe we're a bit early in the week at time of recording and streaming. But there is some Insidious news for fans of going into the further Insidious 6 no longer releasing in 2025. Write-up comes from John Squires. The horror genre's 2025 release slate is already being shaken up, with the sixth installment in the long-running Insidious film franchise no longer returning to theatres this year. Originally planned for release from Sony on August 29th, 2025, the untitled Insidious 6 will no longer be meeting that date. In fact, Insidious 6 won't be released until 2026. Insidious 6 will now take you back into the further on August 21st, 2026. In addition to the upcoming sixth installment in the mainline series, the franchise will also be expanded upon with spin-off Thread, an Insidious Tale, which doesn't yet have a release date. Mandy Moore and Kumail Nanjiani will star in Thread, an Insidious Tale. At this time, nothing is known about Insidious 6. Stay tuned for more. So I am a pretty big fan of the Insidious series. I have fond memories of going to see the first Insidious in the cinema, and I think in terms of horror trips to the cinemas, the initial kind of releases of the Insidious films and the Conjuring films were just a great sort of time. I think both franchises certainly aren't at the same level as the early entries, and of course that's fairly natural. It's not often that you're going to get 4 or 5 entries down the line and still be achieving a high benchmark. Obviously with the Conjuring series there's been more kind of spin-offs as opposed to mainline entries, but first 2 Conjuring films I think were excellent. The third one was pretty darn good, and with Insidious I felt that the first and third were excellent. The second was pretty good in terms of rounding out that story at that stage, but it was a little bit cheesy in places. Just as it was mainly the ghost mother. I can't remember the name, but the mother of Parker Crane. Just a little bit cheesy for my liking. And Insidious 4. Insidious 4 I disliked on my first watch. I didn't really think it was very good. When I did do a repeat viewing for the Insidious show a little while ago, it's okay. It is a drop off in quality, and it does go very much into that realm of the Buffy and Charmed, and to an extent supernatural fight style, where everything is, I'm going to knock you and you're going to go flying to show my power, but then obviously if I'm that powerful, why can't I just rip your head off? That sort of thing, TV combat, you could call it, where everyone's thrown into like boxes and stuff like that sort of thing. And with Insidious 5 or Insidious the Red Door, I was very excited for it. The trailers were very good, but it was very much just okay. I did feel that maybe part of it might have been cut down because it felt like there was just a bit of a jump in the narrative. And it was a film that certainly had some creepy moments. But because the moments around those set pieces weren't that memorable, the moments themselves didn't become super memorable in comparison to the first couple of entries. And it was almost like the memorable moments are kind of the rehashes of those incidences. I don't think Insidious the Red Door is bad, but I did feel a little bit disappointed after watching it. It's a return to that family going into the further, but I don't think it kind of nailed it. So I had forgotten that we're getting a 6th Insidious. But I do feel with this stage that we should have moved past that family story after the second film. But I get that this is a way to check back in with them and find out that there's some issues and some there's been a bit of a deterioration in the relationships. That being said, I don't think we need to go back down that route again with Insidious 6. I think that's kind of been done, personally. And then with the spin-off Thread and Insidious Tale, I can't really hold an opinion on that at this stage. I mean, at the end of the day, the world of the further and, that area, there's going to be a number of people that will have interacted with it or passed over into there. It's not going to be just isolated purely to Elaine and I can't remember the family's name, but the main family, we'll just say. So there we go. Some news that we're going to have to wait a little bit longer, Insidious fans, for the next entry into the further. So next up in the news, delve into a mysterious facility in dystopian horror dungeon crawler Repose. Some video game news from Mike Wilson. Developer Bozo Attila Bertold has teamed up with publisher Akupra Games for a journey into dystopian horror with Repose. Set to release later this year on Steam, you'll be exploring increasingly confusing and surreal areas as you'll make your way to the bottom of a seemingly abandoned facility in a game that harkens back to old school dungeon crawlers with its pixel graphics and gameplay methodically built to maximize tension and intrigue. It's your first day at the company. Your job doesn't seem so bad. The pay is decent and your co-workers are fine. You've been tasked with recovering damaged oxygen tanks scattered throughout the facility. Don't ask what they're for. Don't ask where they came from. Aaron used to do the same job. Don't ask about Aaron. Focus on Cynthia. She's kind to you, isn't she? Doesn't she care? Yet you can't shake the feeling that something sinister is at hand. And why are you always so tired? Every step counts in Repose. You'll need to make considered decisions, as each step, shot, and trap you set off drains your limited energy. That also includes fighting whatever it is that's down here. You'll need to outwit and outfight the creatures lurking in the facility, using your light to find them and your axe to kill them. Though the company says that you probably won't need it, you do have a handgun with you, just in case. So I haven't actually looked at this gameplay yet, but that does sound like a fairly interesting setup for a video game. I mean, the initial artwork does very much look like Game Boy, original Game Boy Doom, but like, you know, a first. I mean, I don't think you could have had Doom on an original Game Boy. Like, I know Doom is a fairly archaic game, but in terms of that color palette and that art style, I'll just have a quick look at the trailer. So it's very much black and white visuals. In terms of the movements, isn't freeform movement, but kind of just you go forward and it refreshes as your character sort of like is transferring forwards. I mean, it sounds neat and interesting enough. But I guess if I'm being honest, the art style isn't really for me. Very indie centric, but if that is your jam, then keep an eye out for Repose. Retro. Next up, Stranger Things 5 will be like watching 8 blockbuster movies back to back. Right up from John Squires. We've got Eddie the Beast in the chat. I should shout out Eddie. Welcome to the show. Thank you very much, dude. So, the 5th and final season of Stranger Things is headed our way here in 2025, and series creators the Duffer Brothers have offered up some fresh Stranger Things 5 teasers. As reported by Entertainment Weekly, Matt and Ross Duffer are hyping the final hours of the hit Netflix series less as episodes and more as a series of 8 blockbuster movies. We spent a full year filming this season. By the end, we'd captured over 650 hours of footage, Ross Duffer said at a Netflix event today. So needless to say, this is our biggest and most ambitious season yet. It's like 8 blockbuster movies. It's pretty insane. Season 5 will be big and epic, Matt Duffer added, echoing Ross's promise of the final season. There's no time for a ramp up. It's going to be intense from beginning to end. The scale of Stranger Things 5 is bigger than the previous 4 seasons, but the brothers also tease that the season will somewhat mark a return to the vibes of the first season. It's also going to feel familiar, Ross notes. This season is the biggest it's ever been in scale, but everyone's back together at Hawkins, interacting the same way they were in Season 1. David Harbour, Millie Bobby Brown, Winona Ryder and Maya Hawke are back for Stranger Things 5, being joined by new faces, including Terminator icon Linda Hamilton. Set in the fall of 1987, 1 year after the events of Season 4, Season 5 will consist of 8 episodes. The Crawl, The Vanishing of... blank, The Turnbow Trap, Sorcerer, Shock Jock, Escape from Camazotz, The Bridge, and The Right Side Up. While Stranger Things 5 is the final season of the main series, the Duffer Brothers have consistently promised that the show's universe isn't closing up for business anytime soon. There are more Stranger Things stories to tell and in the works, they tease. Check out a new promo poster that Netflix released this morning. Missing Teen. Jane Hopper, which is 11, White female, 15 years old, date of birth 6th of the 7th, 71, height 5'4", last seen wearing a hooded jacket, walking alone in the vicinity of Hawkins High School on June 13th, 1986. Reward for information leading to the location of missing child. A reward totaling $3,000 will be paid for all leads which result in the location of Jane Hopper or her body. Last seen walking on the sidewalk near Hawkins High School, where she mysteriously disappeared that afternoon. June 13th, 1986. Contact the Hawkins Police Department if you have any information regarding the whereabouts of this person. Call 765-303-2020. Okay, so Stranger Things. I'm a big fan. I keep meaning to give the original run a rewatch. I know my fiance would like to watch the show. Difficulty is finding the time to squeeze it in. So I don't know, when it gets closer to the point that that season 5 is going to return, we're just going to have to allocate the time, which is easier said than done when planning a wedding. But big fan of it. I mean, loved season 1. Season 2 was pretty good except for one episode, which is why I've never rewatched season 2. I thought season 3 was very good. I know some people weren't really a fan. I thought season 4 was very good. I loved the ramp up in the horror. I liked the use of Metallica. I liked the use of Kate Bush. Like the whole Vecna stuff I thought was really good. And the way that Vecna disposed of people I thought was super violent in terms of it being shocking, but without being grotesque. And it really added to the mythos. So I'm very hyped for season 6. I certainly don't think it's fallen off yet. I do think fandom gets very weird. Like, there was this huge fan interest in the character of Eddie, and then people were pissed off that Eddie, spoiler alert, dies in it. But I thought Eddie was a cool character, but I do feel it was one of those things where it was more of an online movement that people jumped on top of, because he's not in the show that much. But people became enamored, and it became this whole thing of this Eddie movement, and people pissed off that what's happened to Eddie. Like, you know, he's a side character joining in late. You got to think that the likelihood of we're always going to get characters introduced that may join the main group. That has happened with Max, with I can't remember her name, but Maya Hawke's character. But there are going to be characters introduced who ultimately meet their demise, because we haven't had any of the main cast really have that happen yet, and you need to have some tragedy. That's just storytelling at the end of the day. So yeah, it's Eddie in the chat. Wow, I'm popular, JK. So yeah, Eddie Munster in season 4 became a bit of a phenomenon, and really, I think, I suppose, boosted up the actor's career. Joe, what's his name? Terrible with names. But I'm very much hyped for this. I think with Stranger Things, they really kind of caught lightning in a bottle of people's nostalgia for that time of the 80s, and not just the 80s itself, but the films of the 80s, the music of the 80s, the fashion of the 80s. It has a very sort of faithful feel, and you've almost got a bit of an Amblin tone at times, or Touchstone films at times, but you know, with a modern approach. So I do have faith that they'll stick the landing. I certainly haven't fallen off, but I understand why people might have during its run so far. And if you haven't ever watched Stranger Things, well, I suppose the only negative to say is in this era, unless you pay a bomb through your nose, you'll have your Stranger Things experience broken up by ads. Streaming platforms and their ads. I'm gonna go off on a little bit of a rant here, because it's something that's pissed me off. So, although I can't really be justified because it's free. So I get we get Paramount Plus because we have Sky Cinema, and you get Paramount Plus as a freebie. Paramount Plus have now introduced ads to their platform, which every streaming platform seemingly does, which is just annoying because we got used to not having ads and already paying ever increasing prices for the more platforms that we have. And introduced ads, but it's not just, you know, ads placed like Prime sometimes can be okay to just have one set of ads in the middle of a show and not be too invasive. Other times a bit worse. And Netflix, I don't think is too bad really for the ads. Well, so far, I mean, I don't watch too much Netflix other than a bit of the WWE. Paramount Plus, in a 40-minute show, you've got probably at least 5 ad breaks, and some of them go on for 3 minutes. And one of the ads that they say, or that they have, is getting tired of ads on Paramount? Upgrade your package to this package or this package, and you'll have no more ads. And it's really just like, come on. There's one thing advertising your platform as, hey, you know, we've got these other levels that you can have, and there's benefits to those levels. But to even just kind of go, oh, gee whiz, you must be getting real sick of these ad breaks by now. If you give us a little bit more money, then you don't have to see them for now. It's just like, come on. So yeah, I've gone off on a tangent here, but it is something that's been pissing me off for the last week or so. Eddie in the chat, ads taking over the world. The worst ones are the same ads over and over again. Oh yeah, I would agree with that, Eddie, because the days of wanting to binge watch something properly, and I would say, for me, when each season of Stranger Things came out, I basically watched them either in a sitting or in 2 sittings. Generally in 2 sittings, like half a season one night, the rest, the following day if it's a weekend. The ability to do that is no longer here. I don't have the time to do binging anymore. But I would do that with Cobra Kai as well. Although I haven't watched the latest season of Cobra Kai. I think I've kind of burnt out on Cobra Kai in terms of my, the ridiculousness. So I haven't bothered watching the latest season. But the days of being able to, for me, just sit there and go, oh, let's just binge watch this show without getting annoyed with the ad breaks, I think is kind of probably gone at this stage. And I do understand that, well, if you pay a bit more, then you don't have the ads. And YouTube, for example, I watch a lot of YouTube, and part of me does think, should I do the month free trial of YouTube Premium, YouTube Red, whatever it's called? But again, it's paying for another service, and I find with YouTube, specific like channels like Smosh, something like Smosh, or if you're watching it on your TV as opposed to on your phone or a tablet, it's so many more ads depending on the device that you're using to watch YouTube. It is mental. It's just it's crazy. And Fran in the chat says ad breaks make it easier to stop and do something else, so overdoing them is a mistake. Yeah, I mean, I guess the flip side that you could say in the argument is, well, if you think about the days of watching something on TV, like prior to, recording shows directly to a hard drive or doing catch-up TV, you'd watch TV and you'd have like a 3-minute ad break. And for a 1-hour show, you'd get probably about 3 ad breaks to make it about just under an hour's time. So in that regard, it does make sense, because then, yeah, you could go and do something else. But it does feel that they haven't really nailed when to pop in those ad breaks, because I guess in those days, those TV shows, it would almost be kind of formatted for, well, here's an appropriate point to put an ad break in, because it wouldn't feel as obtrusive as it is now, where a character can be in the middle of going, I can't believe it. I can't believe you killed. Hey, get your new holiday on blah, blah, blah.com. Head over here now with the discount code. And, where the ads kind of come completely out of nowhere and just really cut. There's kind of no thought as to when the ad's placed. It's almost basically just an algorithm of, right, once they hit play on this show, have a 30-second ad at the start. Not even 10 minutes in, have a 3-minute ad. Give them another 5 minutes, then have a 30. It's just bombardment at times. Anyway, I'm going to get off my soapbox now, because we've got a few more bits of news to talk about. Then we'll get into the reviews. But yeah, I haven't had a good rant on the show for a little while, and ad breaks. I suppose the over invasiveness of and the regularity of ad breaks, and especially as Eddie had said, when you're getting the same ones over and over again. So, for example, Paramount Plus, the ads are basically the same excuse me, there's about 3 ads, and it's just too much on that platform. Fran Chat says, but you knew when the ad breaks were and roughly how long? Quarter of an hour for about 3 minutes. Online streaming, it feels so random and is more annoying. Yeah, exactly. Something like Lost on Channel 4, for example, or Sky One. There'd be a moment where you've had your opening event, and something has happened. You've got your opening titles. Then there's been a bit of a discussion, and someone has said something that's left a bit of a sour note in someone else's mouth, and they're looking off like I'm not sure I trust that character. And then a perfect moment, dropping an ad. You got 3 minutes when it comes back with another set of characters and whatnot. But it worked a bit more. And I guess if you're making things for streaming, you don't have to populate that, because you can go, shows now aren't necessarily 20 minutes strict on streaming. The show lengths can vary, and that's great in terms of doing the narrative story and whatnot. But I guess now with the advent of ads, it just makes it kind of more difficult to ensure that the ad breaks are going to make sense. It feels so invasive. Anyway, Locked trailer. Bill Skarsgård steals the wrong vehicle in Sam Raimi produced horror thriller. Megan Navarro writes, Nosferatu and It star Bill Skarsgård finds himself trapped by a sinister Anthony Hopkins in the new trailer for horror thriller Locked that arrived this morning. Locked will be released in theatres March 21st, 2025. In the intense horror thriller, when Eddie, Bill Skarsgård, breaks into a luxury SUV, he steps into a deadly trap set by William, Anthony Hopkins, a self-proclaimed vigilante delivering his own brand of twisted justice. With no means of escape, Eddie must fight to survive in a ride where escape is an illusion, survival is a nightmare, and justice shifts into high gear. The film hails from director David Yarovesky, who did Brightburn, writer Michael Arlen Ross, and producer Sam Raimi. So I haven't yet watched the trailer for this, but I have faith in Bill Skarsgård. I haven't really seen him take a step wrong in the horror world. Obviously, he's been in It Chapter 1 and 2, and I much prefer Chapter 1, but his performance in both was very good. I think it's brilliant as Count Orlok in Nosferatu. And he even did that film with Micah Monroe, where they're like a bit of like a Bonnie and Clyde that end up trying to rob the wrong house. Can't remember what that one was called, but that was a pretty good little black comedy horror. I'm sorry, I've just been distracted. In the chat, Fran the Cannon, William or Hannibal? I should change my name. Wasn't there a point in time where there was 1 ad, then 2 ads? Now there's about 5 on YouTube. But yeah, YouTube is incredibly over the top with the ads. Fran the Cannon, William or Hannibal? I'm lost. I've probably missaid someone's name, because I do that all the time. I asked my fiance if she could get me a Diet Coke earlier on. She was going downstairs. I ended up going downstairs with her. When she went to give me the Diet Coke, I went, "Oh, I wanted a Pepsi Max," and she was just like, "Are you gaslighting me?" No, I no doubt will have said the wrong thing. Because that does just happen, and I've had little notes on the show where I've sort of gone, why have I mentioned Leatherface when I'm talking about Friday the 13th? Things like that. But yeah, Bill Skarsgård, I think, is he's a good name in the horror world at the moment. And Anthony Hopkins, I haven't seen too much of him recently. Well, not so much recently in the horror world, but I mean, he doesn't really do bad performances. I know he is getting on a bit, but I think there's good pedigree there. I mean, in terms of the director, the only thing that I know that they've done is Brightburn, and I think Brightburn had an interesting setup, but didn't nail it for me. Fran Chat, Hopkins' character, this should be a Silence of the Lambs prequel. I mean, they could always take the approach of Jigsaw and just give him a backwards baseball hat and say, yeah, this is a younger Hannibal Lecter. Oh, they certainly could. They certainly could give that a go. I mean, it worked in Saw to a degree, but anyway, let's move on with the horror news. David Arquette returns to the slasher genre in Kill or Be Killed, right up by Alex DiVincenzo. David Arquette will return to the slasher genre in Kill or Be Killed, Deadline reports. The Scream icon is set to star in the upcoming horror film alongside Alicia Newton. David Straighten will direct from a script by Nick Ziegler. School's out, and recent grad Danny and her friends are ready for one last summer blowout. But when a senior's mutilated body is discovered on the high school football field, killed in a disturbingly theatrical fashion, it's clear that someone is playing by a new set of rules. A red envelope pinned to the corpse contains a yearbook photo and a chilling directive: kill or be killed. As the bodies pile up, Danny and her friends are thrust into a terrifying game orchestrated by a sick killer that transcends their small town and soon goes viral. The film is produced by Other Animal Entertainment and executive produced by John Long. Yaron Levy, who worked on Scream, the TV series, and Snowpiercer, will serve as director of photography. I mean, it's David Arquette, it's Dewey. You gotta love him. And obviously, you know, in terms of this show's parallels with the wrestling world, he is infamous in the wrestling world for one reason or another. I'm not too familiar with the other people involved on this. I've never watched Heartland, which Alicia Newton is from. David Straighten worked on Star Trek Enterprise. Star Trek isn't really my thing. Hemlock Grove, I did see the first season and is very much nothing. And Nick Ziegler worked on Chucky and The Purge. Now, The Purge TV series I've not seen. Chucky, hit and miss for me. Hit and miss. It's definitely one I'm going to keep an eye out for. But we don't really have too much to go on that. It's all very much, this has just been announced. I think they're looking to shoot this summer. So one to keep an ear out for, certainly. And then finally in the horror news, 1990s favourite The Faculty is getting a remake at Miramax. The 90s, and this is a John Squires write-up, the 90s are hot again here in 2025, with properties including Scream, I Know What You Did Last Summer, and even Idle Hands all plotting returns. Additionally, Variety reports today that Miramax is headed back to school with a remake of The Faculty, now in the works. Robert Rodriguez, who directed the original back in 1998, is returning to produce the remake, with Drew Hancock attached to write the screenplay. The Faculty remake will be produced by Boulder Light. Written by Kevin Williamson, the 1998 sci-fi horror film starred a cast of hot young talents including Jordana Brewster, Cleo Duvall, Laura Harris, Josh Hartnett, Sean Hatosi, Famke Janssen, Piper Laurie, Bebe Neuwirth, Robert Patrick, Usher Raymond, Jon Stewart, and Elijah Wood. In that original movie, a group of small-town high school students, including an introverted photographer and a charismatic drug dealer, begin to suspect something's off with their teachers. After realizing the faculty is, in fact, under the control of mind-controlling alien parasites, the kids are outnumbered and endangered. Now they're in a fight against an invasion against not only their school and their town, but also the entire world. I'm a big fan of the Faculty. I mean, the only thing about it that dates it, I think, is the CGI right near the end. It's not terrible, but it's not great. It's one of those things where it's a big set piece, but it is gloopy 90s CGI. I mean, that being said, the music is stellar. The performances are great. I mean, it is Invasion of the Body Snatchers, but in a high school, contemporary 2000s or late 90s high school. Yeah, late 90s, 1998. I love The Faculty. It's one of the few films that I actually bought on Prime, because one time I just really wanted to watch it. It wasn't available to stream on any streaming platforms, but it was available in the Prime store. So I thought, you know what? Let's just buy this. And yeah, I'm always down for watching the Faculty. It's a great film. Great performance, isn't it? Great music. In terms of them doing a remake, it wouldn't surprise me if they did a remake / requel, so they get someone back and have a little nod to their character. Kind of like The Craft because it's a very sort of similar sort of time to The Craft, and that The Craft Legacy or whatever it's called, that was shit. That was I didn't like that. It was just very much a nothing film, and I kind of just feel like I don't know if I want to see that world, because like the faculty caught a period of time that for people of my generation and whatnot was that experience of I mean, I wasn't a teen at this point, I was a bit young, but you watch it then in, you know, the later years, and catching that period of time where you're going into more kind of grunge, alternative rock, metal music, if that is the path that you sort of took. And the fashions at the time, you know, from 1998 really weren't too dissimilar to like the kind of grungy or metalhead or rocker kind of aesthetics that my kind of group had, you know, in the 2000s when hitting that sort of age range. So it really kind of resonated. Like, as I say, music was great because it had some great bands that have become quite timeless since then, who were very, you know, very, very popular at that time. But if we were to transpose this into the modern day, it may well resonate with the youth, but I think there is a reason why. I mean, again, I'm assuming that a remake of The Faculty would be set in the modern day and wouldn't be trying to replicate the time period. But then that being said, I think there's a reason why things like Stranger Things and that have resonated, because the nostalgia element of going into those times and those times sort of hitting different. You know, the 90s wasn't a nostalgia piece at the time; it was very much a current thing. But you look at the current time, like, I don't know if I'd find that interesting. Like a bunch of high school influencers and TikTokers and all that. I don't know. I think it would just make me feel incredibly old if there was a new take on The Faculty, and I don't know. When it comes to remakes, I try to take the approach of, look, the original isn't going anywhere. There are plenty of remakes that I do enjoy. There's some remakes that I enjoy more than the originals. So I try to. Apologies about the dogs downstairs. I try to reserve judgment when it comes to a remake until it's out, because it's not going to replace the original in my heart, or very unlikely that it is. That being said, it seems that the Pooches of Horror don't like the sound. They don't like the sound that I'm trying to justify that a remake for The Faculty might be okay. Yeah, they're kicking off. Yeah, I will try to reserve judgment. I guess it depends on the hands that it's in. I mean, Robert Rodriguez coming on to produce, that's a bit more reassuring, I guess. But then, I mean, how many films have someone like a Robert Rodriguez, or to an extent an Eli Roth, attached to produce, but it really doesn't make a difference other than helping to sell that film on the posters? Yeah. Interesting news. I mean, I hadn't also heard the news about Idle Hands returning. Idle Hands is a film that really just, I don't know why it isn't available on streaming platforms, you know, like Prime or Tubi or Netflix, because that is a classic film that really needs a reevaluation. But in terms of it having a remake, don't know. I don't know if I want to see that. Anyway, so before we move on to the reviews, let's have a quick look at the chat. Fran chat. Current Hollywood seems largely creatively bankrupt. Can't come up with new stuff, so just remakes and tarnishes the original by association. At least I Know What You Did Last Summer is a continuation. Yeah, that's one thing that I'm quite interested to see how they approach that. I mean, when it comes to Hollywood at the moment, I saw quite an interesting segment from Hot Ones. I've never really watched Hot Ones, but I know that that's where the people eat hot wings and famous people and have a bit of a chat. And I'm pretty sure it's Hot Ones, and it had Matt Damon on, and he was asked about his film experience recently. And I won't go into all of the blurb of what he said, but essentially, previously with films, if you have like a 25 million budget, it's really more like 100 million because the production may be 25 million, but then you've got your advertising, your marketing, your back end pay for staff and whatnot, and the cast. So really, a 25 million budget is close to 100 million, but it wasn't necessarily too much of a worry because you could hope to recoup your initial budget with the theatrical release, the box office. But if that didn't quite do as well as planned, you will then generally get your money back on home media, your DVD sales, and maybe also Blu-ray. But since streaming has come in, that revenue element is kind of gone. Because I don't know what it's like with film, but I know with music that streams on Spotify, places like that, the artist gets 0.000 whatever of a penny per stream. So as opposed to selling a CD for an album for like £10 a CD, let's say, and the artist would get a percentage, and the record company would get a percentage, but the artist would get something from that. Those days there are gone, and it's the same with films. So essentially, the purpose of me saying that is studios, and I think this is why thriller films have sort of gone down the toilet in terms of studio thriller films in the cinema. Studios have just become very hesitant to do things like the classic comedy films like Step Brothers and things like that. It just becomes a bit more of a risk because you don't have that home media market to the same level. Because a lot of people I love physical media, but a lot of people will take the convenience of streaming over going out to purchase it or rent a physical copy. So I do think that that's why we are then in the period now where films are franchises or Marvel films, DC films, because, well, you can expect that you're going to get a few 100 million at the box office because people are going to flock to see the new Marvel film. But there's not really that riskiness. It's almost too risk averse now to go with new ideas. We do still get the fresh new ideas, like new adaptations or fresh adaptations of like Neon with the monkey and their previous indie hit of Long Legs, and then there's that new film Companion, which looks kind of interesting. But in terms of the big films that get the headlines, yep, remakes. So yeah, The Faculty's getting a remake. I want to give it a chance, but I can't see it eclipsing the original because the original is brilliant. And anyway, Ghouls and Fiends, that is it for the horror news. That was the news. Oh. There we go. Right. Let's move on now to our review section. And Fran chat says maybe we should start calling remakes demakes. Very good. Yeah, in most cases that is the route it's gone. Look at The Craft, which technically was a sequel, but it's one of those things where it's a requel. It's a remake that then has a bit of a tacked on element to make it a sequel. So the first up in the reviews, I watched a few weeks ago, but I completely forgot to review it on the last week's show. Last Voyage of the Demeter, also known as Dracula: Voyage of the Demeter in some international markets. It's a 2023 American supernatural horror film directed by Andre Ovredal and written by Braji F. Shute Jr. and Zach Olkowicz. It's an adaptation of The Captain's Log, a chapter from the 1897 novel Dracula by Bram Stoker. Film stars Corey Hawkins, Eileen Francosi, Liam Cunningham, and David Datsmalchian. Its plot follows the doomed crew of the merchant ship Demeter, who attempt to survive the treacherous ocean voyage from Transylvania to London, while being stalked by a legendary vampire known as Dracula, played by Javier Botet. Okay, so this, as with all the reviews, we'll talk a little bit about the plot. We'll go into the highs and lows of the film, and then I will give it a score out of 10. So this is a film that's been on my radar to watch for, well, a year. But its UK release has been oddly quiet for a very long time. I believe that the UK did get a theatrical release, but it was one of those that was so limited, it was maybe in the cinema for a week. And even then, it was probably a screening a night or a couple of screenings in that week. Like, I completely missed the opportunity to see this at the cinema because it was in and out like that. And then for a long time, you could only purchase it as physical media, but an import, like a European import. It does now have a physical release coming for the UK in February, and this has now been available on the Prime store for a few weeks now. So eventually, I went ahead to rent it because I've wanted to kind of watch it for a long time. But it is odd how the release has kind of gone for this. Looking further on down here, I can see that it grossed 21.7 million worldwide against a budget of 45 million, making it a box office bomb. But I really kind of think that has to come down to the marketing, because you got a Dracula film that looks pretty good, has some good set pieces on it. I mean, it's set on this boat at sea. Why wouldn't you make the most of that? But it just kind of felt like one of those films where they just didn't push it. They just didn't push the release. And if you're not going to put any money into marketing, and you're going to give it such a limited theatrical run, then how can you expect it to be a success? It's just not going to happen. You can't expect to recoup your budget if the film doesn't have much of a theatrical run, and then it's held in release limbo for a year, essentially. But I digress. We'll talk about the plot. On the 6th of August 1897, the merchant ship Demeter washes ashore in England. Among its wreckage, the police found the log kept by her captain, Elliot. 1 month earlier, Demeter has made port in Varna, Bulgaria, to receive cargo bound for London. A shipment of multiple large wooden crates is delivered to the dock by local Romanian workers. However, upon delivery of the cargo, they will not proceed, instead declaring that they must leave the area before sundown. One of the men pays the quartermaster and another crewman a large sum of money and wishes Demeter a safe voyage before departing with the others. I mean, there's quite a lot more in terms of reading out the plot, but really that is kind of the setup. And ultimately, if you've ever seen Bram Stoker's Dracula, if you've ever seen any iteration of Nosferatu, this is that chapter of the Dracula book focusing on the ship transporting Dracula, or in Nosferatu's case, Orlok, to England, or in the Nosferatu adaptations, it's Germany. And what happens to the crew? Because in those adaptations, we basically see the odd moment of what's occurring on the ship and the odd appearances of Dracula, but we don't really kind of get into how he takes apart and just destroys the crew from the inside out. But with here, we've got some pretty good performances. I mean, Liam Cunningham is known from Game of Thrones. David Dalton, we're big fans of him on Ministry of Horror. You know, in terms of like Late Night with the Devil and Prisoners, has got a role in that, which is one of my favourite thrillers. So the performances in this are pretty darn good. The pacing in this, for a 2-hour film that's set pretty much entirely on a boat, is pretty darn good. I mean, initially I kind of thought, oof, one chapter of a fairly small book at 2 hours with one location really throughout the majority of it is going to be a hard sell. But it does a good job of showing how the relationships are slowly being broken down when the understanding of what is actually occurring on this ship starts to become apparent. Dracula in himself is both a high and a low of the film. So this is the first that I can think of iteration of Dracula where he is more monster than any semblance of man. The only element of a man in terms of appearance is the shape of their head. 2 eyes, nose, mouth, and whatnot. But outside of that, this is essentially man-bat. Large sinewy wings, leathery skin. It is a bat. that's got a bit of an appearance of a man, and that works quite well because Dracula is quite creepy in this, and is incredibly menacing, incredibly violent in places. Like there is a moment that pulls no punches in the same way that a recent scene in the recent Nosferatu pulls no punches. If you know what I mean in Nosferatu, then you'll have an idea of what may occur in Last Voyage of the Demeter. But that being said, I do kind of feel we could have done with seeing a bit of the dichotomy of the character, to see, well, how is this thing supposed to integrate into London life when he gets there? Because at the moment, it's not a case of, well, it's just a creepy looking pale guy like Count Orlok, or oh, okay, well, it's an iteration of, like Gary Oldman's Dracula, where he can look like Mum Ra, but then also look like suave Gary Oldman, but then also look like a werewolf. We don't really get that. We just get this one appearance, and later on in the film, we do get a glimpse of what they would look like dressed in human clothing, but it very much is a case of, you don't need one person to come within a few inches of you to go like, well, what the hell, you're not a human. So I do feel that it's almost a bit too much of a trade up to have this version of Dracula be full on monster. That being said, we have positives in terms of some of the vampire attacks, really quite menacing. Some of the vampiric infections are also incredibly menacing. But then some of the CGI is a bit like, I guess what I could liken it to, another Javier Botet film, Mother. No, not Mother, Mama. The film from a couple of years ago. Andreas, whatever his name is. God damn, I'm also awful with names. Mama from 2023 by Andy Muschietti. There we go. So the reason why I liken it to that is because Mama, earlier on, the less you see, the creepier it looks. Later on, as the film goes, and you see a bit more of it, and it's got that spectral appearance, and it looks quite similar to what later would be in It Chapter 1, the woman from the painting with the flute. It's kind of got a similar sort of arched face like that. It loses that mystique and terror because we're seeing too much, and what we are seeing looks kind of shonky CGI, because how would you be able to do that look without CGI? It's one of those things where it's like, we need to kind of have a bit of a balance, because we're getting a very creepy visual, but because we're seeing too much of it and it's very obviously CGI, it doesn't have the same effect. And that's what happens in some instances with Dracula, where the CGI lets it down. And I think that is in more of the close-up scenes than anything. Like the attacks when it's swooping through the sky and launching onto people, very good, very creepy. The close-up moments, yeah, it does let itself down a little bit. But that being said, it doesn't affect the film overall. We get some nice set pieces in there, some great performances, and it doesn't outstay its welcome. I think the finale is pretty good for this as well. And I like the way that they resolve the story, and it does lead into the next stage of the Dracula story. Obviously, they're not going to be able to do that as a box office bomb, and I don't know if there were plans to follow this up with a, following on where Dracula goes around London. But for the small source material it's used, it's done it very well, and it has made a scary Dracula, but it isn't a flawless Dracula. And whilst there's bite in these fangs, maybe one fang's a bit dulled. I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. So it's still good, but there's a couple of things that do knock it down a bit. It's a decent time though. 7 out of 10 for Last Voyage of the Demeter. Next up, the other review for today. I watched on Shudder recently, Grafted, which Wikipedia doesn't have much of a blurb about. Let's just doesn't even have a link to IMDb. Okay, well, Grafted is a 2024 horror film directed by Sasha Rainbow and stars Jolena Sun as the leading actress. The film also stars Jess Hong, Eden Hart, Jared Turner, Seppi Toy, Mark Mitchinson, Jeanette McDonald, Sam Wang, Trendle Polini, Chloe Parker. There's a lot of people. The film follows an awkward but brilliant Chinese student who wins a scholarship into a prestigious New Zealand university. So I apologise. Earlier on, I said Australia. I didn't realise this was set in New Zealand. My bad. Apologies. To study medical research. The film is primarily shot in Auckland, New Zealand. Okay. So I've never seen, prior to this, any well, okay, that's a lie. I was about to say I've never really seen any New Zealand-based horrors, but early Peter Jackson's work, like Brain Dead and God, I'm awful with names. Brain Dead. We'll just say early Peter Jackson, like Brain Dead and Bad Taste. Really were unique approaches to that world, and I wasn't really too sure what to think about this one. I mean, Shudder releases are a real mixed bag. Sometimes you get a good gem in there, and other times you just end up watching some absolute just dog crap. Or we just end up going through a lot of middling stuff without finding too many gems. But thankfully, with Grafted, this is quite a showing. So I'll talk from memory. The film opens up with a young, well, we haven't even got her character's name. Let's just go to the IMDb page, and we might have a little bit more information. Grafted. There we go. A bright but socially awkward exchange student takes her craving for popularity to horrifying heights. Okay, so no, Angela isn't the main character. Wei, there we go. Wei is our main character. Jesus Christ, that was difficult. So Wei, as a young girl, has this birthmark on her face, quite a large birthmark, and her dad has a similar birthmark. But he is a scientist, researching into like botany and skin grafting as a way to heal the skin and take away impurities, let's say. But his research, there's a bit of a mistake there, and it ends up costing him his life in quite a graphic fashion. Cut forward to 10 years later, Wei is exchanged into this New Zealand school with her very wealthy Chinese aunt and her cousin Angela, who isn't very nice. So Wei sticks out like a sore thumb at the school, but she begins to excel in science. And she's got her dad's notebook for his research, where she's looking into basically this skin grafting technique, and it starts to work. She slices off some skin. I mean, the surgery things in this are pretty grim. She slices off a slither of skin from her thigh, and then places this this fluid that she has developed from this plant, and that heals up the skin. No scar, easy peasy. But then there's this whole relationship where the professor, who she's working under, is also a bit of a creep and is sleeping with a number of the students. He was a bit of a whiz and became, a marvel at 17, but really it's kind of been chasing that same high again, to the extent of stealing others' work for his own. To give you a bit of an idea of the setup, so in amongst that, we've got Wei, who's so socially awkward, and it's a mixture of trying to fit in, but also having accidental crimes, very violent crimes, and trying to cover those up by stealing identity. For example, cutting off a character's face and grafting it to their own, and then pretending to be that person. It's pretty gory in places, but it's done in quite an artfully tasteful way, as much as you can. I mean, there's a scene when a character is trying to hide in a pond and they get found and have a hand drill is pushed through their head. Like it's pretty gratuitous in places, and the finale is full on body horror. It kind of goes like in a realm that's a little bit akin to the Substance without going down that grandiose way, but in terms of body horror, it really goes to this next level of grotesquerie in comparison to the earlier scenes in the film. Other performances in this were all very good. I mean, Eve, played by Eden Hart, very hateable, which is very good. Angela, played by Jess Hong, again, very hateable, but that's in line with the character. And yeah, Wei, Joanna's son. My goodness. At times you feel for her, at other times you feel terrified by her. It's a real sort of powerhouse performance in this, and this is a film that certainly stood out for me in terms of just, well, shudder horror. As I say, it's a real mixed bag of what kind of quality you're going to get, and also just generally new horror on streaming platforms. It's definitely one to keep an eye out for. So if you have Shudder, it's on there now. Give it a watch. If you don't, consider getting a free trial and giving it a go, because I thought this was great. It was really, really well done. 8 out of 10 for Grafted. And that is it for the reviews on Ministry of Horror. Thank you once again for listening on the show. We are going to stick around. We are going to do a little watch party. I'll go and stretch my legs for a couple of minutes before starting on with the watch party, the watch along. But for those listening at home, watching at home, whether on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, be sure to follow on those platforms of choice. If you're watching on YouTube, give the channel a subscribe, like videos, share them, all that stuff. Really does help with the algorithm. We stream much more regularly now on Twitch, twitch.tv/Tezzius, TEZZRUS. Really trying to build the channel and do what we can with it to make it as big as it can be, and also in line with the patreon.com/Ministry of Horror. We have donation buttons on Twitch, and also there's the membership levels on Patreon. You can even just be a free member if you like. There are the odd things on there like blogs that I've done, and it just helps with the exposure of the channel the more people are members. So that's all the usual shilling that I have to do. If you're watching live, stick around. We'll be continuing on shortly, but if not, I'll catch you later. Goodbye.